A good friend told me this story. He asked me never to share it with anyone. But I believe you should hear it. That's why I changed the names and places. But not what happened. It all starts with trust. You believe in someone. You live with them. Share your days, your seconds, your air. You never even consider that in one moment reality might crack. And then, one object out of place, one detail that doesn't add up, and you start to notice, not immediately. At first, you convince yourself that everything is fine, but the worm of doubt is already inside. This is a story about betrayal, about consequences, about how even the smartest make mistakes, and about punishment. You don't see betrayal right away. It's not a dagger to the heart, but a thin thread that frays slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, you feel a slight tension, but you blame it on exhaustion. Then you notice small details, but you convince yourself everything is fine. I started noticing changes, little things that had never stood out before. She began staying late at work more often. It didn't seem suspicious until her explanation started repeating word for word, like she had memorized a script. "Sorry, love, we're swamped. We have to finish a project and the boss is losing his mind." Always the same, always without details. Then there was her phone. She used to leave it on the nightstand, but now she took it with her, even to the bathroom. "What, are you checking up on me now?" Her laugh sounded forced. I wasn't checking, not yet. But then, she forgot her purse in my car, nothing unusual. But when I accidentally glanced inside, I noticed a bottle of perfume. New. I know her scent, I know her preferences. This wasn't hers. Too sweet, too strong. I didn't ask, I just remembered. And then I saw something else. A receipt. Not right away, not in her things. It was tucked between the pages of an old book she hadn't touched in ages. A hotel receipt. The date, 3 days ago. And that night, she told me she stayed at a friend's place. Trust is a strange thing. It doesn't break all at once, but in layers, like old paint peeling away. I tried not to notice, tried to convince myself everything was fine, that I was just imagining things. But now I knew. After that discovery, I started observing. Not on purpose, I just began noticing details I had previously overlooked. She started taking her phone into the bathroom more often, locking the door. Sometimes she came out with a face full of emotions she tried to suppress. Joy? Excitement? Guilt? I remember one evening when we were watching a movie. She laughed, but her fingers gripped her phone tightly. The screen lit up with a notification, but she didn't look. Just placed it face down. I asked, "Who's texting you?" "Oh, just a colleague from work." She smiled, as if it was nothing. But there was tension in her voice. I started noticing other things. Perfume she'd never worn before. New lingerie bought for no apparent reason. Strange phrases in conversations, slips, changes in tone, as if for a moment she forgot who she was supposed to be with me. But I waited. One night, I heard her get out of bed. Carefully, almost soundlessly. I half opened my eyes. She stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear. She whispered, "Oh no, not now, I can't. Tomorrow." I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. But something inside me had already shattered. Now, I needed to know everything. I knew. There was no doubt anymore. After that night, I started acting differently. I didn't ask her, didn't make a scene. Why would I? She had already pushed me to the background, tucked the truth away like loose change in her pocket. I just started watching. A smartphone is the perfect traitor. Once I started paying attention, I noticed everything. A new password, hidden notifications. Sometimes she placed it face down, but more often she took it with her to another room. I didn't ask why. I just started checking where she went at night. "Over time again?" I asked once. Yeah, work is crazy, she sighed, giving me a tired smile and a quick kiss on the cheek. But there was no exhaustion in her voice. That evening I followed her, not hiding, not sneaking. I knew she wouldn't notice. She was too busy with her new life. She parked near an apartment complex, got out of the car, glanced around, then went inside. I stayed in my car and just waited. An hour later, she came out. Her hair was slightly messy. She looked relaxed. It was a different smile, not the one she gave me. She got into her car and drove off. I stayed there for another 10 minutes. Then I got out and walked into the same building. I wanted to see him. I needed to know who he was. I didn't knock. I just memorized the apartment number. Now I knew where to go. Now he was in the game, too. I sat by the window. The clock read 7:47 p.m. She was late. No calls, no messages. I knew she would show up, but she would make me wait. Now I noticed it in everything. Her habit of being late, the distance in her voice, the slight tension when I looked her in the eyes. Tonight, it would end. A minute later, the door opened. She stepped in, scanning the room. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, just like always. But something was off. Her ease felt too rehearsed, her smile too calculated. I motioned for her to sit. Was the traffic bad? I asked. Yeah, horrible, she answered, tucking her hair behind her ear and nervously glancing at her phone. Traffic, I repeated in my mind. There was no frustration in her voice, no exhaustion from the road. Just a lie, stretched thin like a wire about to snap with one wrong move. I leaned in slightly and told her I had something to show her. I took out my phone and played the video. The screen glowed, casting a pale light over her face. She froze. In the recording, it was her. She was walking out of that building, smiling, fixing her hair, getting into a car and driving away. She asked quietly what it was. I answered calmly. It was her. I gave her a second. Then I asked where she had been last night. She blinked. Her pupils flickered. Her hand clenched the napkin until her knuckles turned white. I worked late, she muttered. I leaned in closer and asked, which hotel? Silence. Her eyes darted toward the exit. I noticed how her breathing quickened, how her fingers gripped the table's edge. She understood. Have you been following me? Her voice was hoarse. I just saw the truth, I replied. She swallowed hard. It's not what you think, her voice cracked. I shook my head. It is. I put my phone away. She stayed quiet. I saw her mind racing, desperately searching for a way out. But there was none. After a few seconds of silence, she whispered, "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" I smirked. I wanted to see how far you'd go. The restaurant's murmur returned, reality snapping back into place. She didn't know what to say. Finally, in a barely audible voice, she asked, "What now?" I checked the time, 7:53 p.m. At that moment, he walked through the door. She didn't even turn around. She just closed her eyes. She already knew. I looked at her. She sat across from me, still holding a crumpled napkin. Her face no longer held a fake smile or a mask of serenity. Just emptiness. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to see who had entered. She already knew. I took a sip of water. "Aren't you going to say anything?" I asked. Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. A man stopped behind her. Calm, confident. He slowly put his phone back in his pocket. He didn't need any more explanations. "So, it's true." His voice was quiet, but the tension in it cut through the air. She shivered but didn't lift her gaze. I watched it unfold as if I were an audience member in a play, right at the start of the third act of a tragedy. He sat down next to her, eyes fixed on her. "You didn't even try to tell me the truth, did you?" She stared into the void. I looked at him. His face was calm, but his clenched fists betrayed him. He didn't know what hurt more, the lie itself or how easy it had been to uncover. I stood up. I've said everything I needed to. I placed the bill on the table without looking at him. She lifted her head and met my gaze. Is this what you wanted? Her voice wavered. No, I answered. But it's what you deserve. I turned and walked toward the exit. The cold air hit my face. I took a deep breath, but I felt no relief. I didn't care what she would tell him. It was all over. I just wanted to leave. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The cold air hit my face, washing away the last traces of emotion. Did I feel any better? Number? Did it feel like a victory? Not at all. I just stood there, listening to the city continue as if nothing had happened. I knew they were still at the table. He would be asking questions. She would be searching for words. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd try to explain. It didn't matter anymore. I checked my phone. No messages, no calls. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't bother me. I just stood there. I remembered how it all started, how I blindly believed in her, in us, how once she took my hand and told me she'd never hurt me. Lies, I said to myself out loud, and that was the only word that truly described everything. I inhaled, then exhaled. Time to move on. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked, not looking around. The city went on with its life. People rushing home, some laughing, others arguing. They didn't know that, for someone, tonight was a point of no return. I stopped in front of a cafe window. Inside, someone sat alone, stirring sugar into their coffee. How many people like them were out there? How many once believed they knew the truth? I stepped inside and ordered a black coffee. While the barista poured it, I realized I couldn't taste anything. I couldn't even smell it. Everything felt flat, dull. I sat by the window and took out my phone. There was one message. From her. Can we talk? I looked at the screen. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. There would be no reply. I didn't answer her. Not then, not later. The day passed in silence. I waited. I wasn't even sure for what. Maybe another message from her. Maybe a call. But there was nothing. That evening, I returned home. The apartment greeted me with darkness and stale air. In the fridge, half an empty bottle of water and a carton of milk expired for several days. I sat at the table staring at my phone. She still hadn't written. And that's when I understood. She just needed to ease her conscience. I tried, she would tell herself, shrug and move on. But I couldn't move on. I decided to call her first. Hello? Her voice was tense. I didn't answer right away. I needed to hear her breathing, her anticipation on the other end. You wanted to talk? Yes. I don't know where to start. Try with the truth. I'm sorry. Too late. I ended the call. I didn't go back to her. I didn't read her messages, didn't answer her calls. Everything that needed to be said, I had already said at the restaurant. I just walked away. It wasn't an escape, nor was it an act of revenge. It was liberation. But the world she had built for herself was falling apart right before my eyes. The news spread quickly. Her colleagues found out. Some saw the recordings, others heard the retellings. She tried to deny it, but the more she lied, the worse it got. People avoided her, looked at her differently. Her friends? One by one, they drifted away. Some, out of pity, told her that time would heal everything, that these things happen. But even they kept their distance. Her parents. They had always believed her, or wanted to believe her. But when the truth surfaced, their disappointment was the final blow. I heard that her mother stopped talking to her. Her father told her she had let him down. And there I was, sitting alone, watching it all unfold from a distance. I should have felt satisfaction. This was what I wanted. Or was it? Where is the line between justice and cruelty? Had I simply put everything in its rightful place? Or had I become someone who destroyed a life, even if it was deserved? What if I had done nothing? If I had just walked away without saying a word? Would it have been easier? Or would the truth have caught up with her anyway? Questions. They spun in my head, but there were no answers. I glanced at my phone again. Another message from her. I didn't read it. I just turned off the screen. Outside, the rain kept falling. People hurried through their lives, unaware of me, of her, of this story. To them, I was just another face in the city. And maybe that's how it should be. 2 years had passed. I had long since left this city, this story, this woman. I thought I had closed this chapter of my life for good. But the past always finds a way to remind us of its presence. The letter arrived unexpectedly. A plain white envelope, nothing unusual. I didn't open it right away. Inside, a neatly folded piece of paper, the handwriting I knew so well. She wrote about her life, about how she had come to understand her mistakes, how, after losing everything, she managed to start over, about a new city, a new job, a new person by her side, about the family she had built, about how long she had wanted to write but never found the courage. Her apologies were sincere. I could feel it. And yet, inside me, a storm was raging. I was supposed to feel relieved, maybe even happy for her. She had found happiness. She'd made things right. But instead, a whirlwind of emotions consumed me. Anger that she had been able to forget and move on. A foolish nostalgia for something that no longer existed. I folded the letter back into the envelope. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I looked out the window. The city carried on, unaware and indifferent to the fact that something inside me had cracked again. Maybe that's how it's meant to be. Maybe, in reality, no one ever gets a perfect ending.